Sharon Sutherland. Sharon is a mediator, conflict resolution trainer, and mediation practicum designer. After 14 years as a law professor, Sharon now focuses her practice on mediation and knowledge engineering for the Civil Resolution Tribunal. She has organized and hosted 2 collaborative game jams where conflict resolution professionals created collaborative tabletop games. The most recent game jam has led to the development and kickstarting of a new card game, Zombie Fight or Flight. So we're in for a very interesting hour, and please let's give a warm welcome to Sharon.
So I'm actually slightly uncertain about how to start today, because I think I need to start by making some links to what I'm talking about, because it's not necessarily really intuitive how I get into collaborative games and how that's something that I see as something we should be teaching at people's law school, for instance. But I just came from this morning talking to a Law 12 class over at the Justice Education Society, and doing exactly the same kind of thing, trying to make links between the culture we have around games, around sports, around competition generally, and how that carries into our conflict culture and the way that we deal with problems, disputes. This week, Conflict Resolution Week for Mediate BC, is about 3 different things. It's about prevention, it's about management, and it's about resolution. And we tend, when we're thinking about the areas of law, we tend to think about conflict as being entirely about the resolution. Like, what do you do when people have a dispute already and are going to court? But there's obviously these whole other sides that we need to focus on. And many of those are just about how do we understand how we work together? How do we actually build the ability to negotiate, to communicate, to effectively manage any disputes that are arising as they're arising. So I'm kind of coming at it from the idea that games might be one of those places we can actually start. And as I go through this, you'll see I'm thinking about it in a number of different ways. I'm thinking about it as the basic building blocks for communication and how do we learn to work with each other. But I'm also looking at it as how do you actually take a game and take it into a dispute and try to resolve a dispute with a game. So it's that whole gamut of things. I'm going to talk for a while, and I've also, obviously you heard that I've got a game going that we developed recently. So I've also brought a game with the idea that at the end we can play a little bit and get a flavor for what a relatively fast collaborative game looks like. And so we'll try and teach that towards the end. Okay. So I should probably ask, any questions? I'm quite open to questions as you go to if I'm not making any sense. Okay. All right. For many people, the idea of competition is something that has been so normalized in our culture that we don't actually even think about it. When we think about playing any kind of games, growing up, did anybody play any games that weren't competitive, that weren't about beating people? If you were playing a competitive, any kind of game, like Monopoly, Risk, all the things that I grew up playing were about beating everybody. Okay? And it was all the normalized kinds of concepts. We keep hearing, learn how to be a good loser. Like, that's a really important thing in life. You need to know how to be a really good loser. And you should be a gracious winner. And these are really important concepts in life, and that's what you take away from gameplay. Sometimes it's even more explicit when you're in sports and things, which actually tend to ramp it up, that you need to participate in team sports so that you can learn how to work in a team. Except, we're going to have all those parents on the sidelines who are only giving their kid a Slurpee if they score a goal. So all of a sudden now you have to be the star player on a team, and you're getting these mixed messages around what it is to actually do teamwork, right? The coach might be doing a great job of talking about, I want to reward the person who's getting the assist, and that's fantastic defensive play. But there's still this yelling and fandom that is going on that is sending people the message that there's something about actually beating the people even on your own team. And where I've seen that kind of come out is, initially I probably didn't recognize it as that, but you start noticing when you're a mediator and you're sitting in different rooms where people are trying to resolve problems. And you're trying to understand why you work in the same industry, for instance, and you kind of have the same interests, and you need to have a continuing relationship, and you need to somehow make this work, why do you automatically start from this place of just utter distrust, right? And they must be trying to beat me. And thinking about every kind of dispute as, if you win, I lose. There's no other way to think about it. And I mean, if you've been in court, you've probably seen that kind of thinking. Court is designed about win, lose. But I find that even when you're in other areas, like a mediation, where you've got somebody there who's trying to facilitate a discussion, trying to get at everybody's interest, trying to build some kind of joint resolution, that even in those situations, there's this struggle to break away from the natural assumption that you have to distrust everybody, and that there is no way to build any kind of rapport, there's no way to build trust. I show this as this is a sense of, here's what we see. I think the normalization of competition also is built into, I'm using pop culture as kind of another example of the way we normalize this notion. When I was looking, I kind of said, okay, well, who are our representatives of good negotiators in pop culture? And I went to TV, and the most recent negotiators on TV, they're all actually highly manipulative, unethical. They take advantage of people's weaknesses. They do the kinds of things, there is absolutely no way is actually rewarded as good negotiation. You might get a good result in one case that way. There is absolutely no way that you are getting a good result in the next case, because everybody's heard about you. Everybody knows who you are, and now there's no chance that you can negotiate a better result. And yet, I think that's still all part of that same cultural norm around competition. We create this sense that it's suspect to see somebody cooperate, that they must be trying to manipulate me, they're trying to take advantage in some way if they're actually offering something, if they're making suggestions. And it's really, really difficult to break through those kinds of things. It's one of the reasons mediation has become such an important part of the legal system, is because you can actually have somebody else step in and assist people to recognize that, oh, maybe this is actually not a really manipulative, tricky little thing that's happening here. It shouldn't have to happen. That we should have the skills to be able to talk to each other and work through a process to develop trust, right? There's a lot of things we can do to demonstrate that we're doing something, that we're being honest. There's a lot of different things we can do, but we don't learn it. In terms of the dispute resolution process, I would say that things that happen because we've got this sense that everybody's trying to take advantage of us are things like a lack of creativity. You don't want to put good ideas out on the table because they might be taken advantage of. You don't want to share information. We all have this sense that we need to hide everything that might be important to us when we're in a negotiation, because if we share it, they'll take advantage of it. They'll use that. Well, if you don't share it, you can never get a result that meets those interests. You're going to have to get something else. So it really is a bit of a problem in terms of this. So here's where I'm at today. One of the things that I've been kind of asking myself for years now as a mediator is, well, what if collaboration were what was normalized when we learn how to play games, when we do things like that? What if there were actually things that rewarded teamwork and punished you for trying to sabotage things? What if some of those were fun? Because I'm going to say that's one of the underlying problems that I have found. Whenever I talk about collaborative games or cooperative games, what I usually get is somebody going, okay, but we used to play those sometimes in elementary school, and they were super boring because they were all about teaching lessons, and they were designed not as a game. They were designed as something that was meant to show you how good it was to get along. And they tend to be aimed at a really lower level, often for 5-year-olds, and then they'd be carried in, they'd be playing them in grade 5, and they really were not very fun at that point. And there'd be all these lessons tied into it. So I find that a lot of people kind of react to that notion of, but that's not fun, right? It's not fun. I've learned that it's not fun. And so I sat down with a bunch of people to kind of look at, well, what would happen if you actually did have games that were fun? Is there a way we can do that? Now, I'm going to take you to this. How many people are game players in the room? Not too many, but enough. Okay, so you're recognizing kind of, I'm choosing a couple examples that are pretty typical of what's been happening in gaming at different times. I certainly grew up with the Monopoly and Risk as probably being two of the first games you'd come up with, the really, really competitive ones. How many people have started moving into some of the European gaming or the models that are more, we're getting a few nods. So the Pandemic, Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert, there's a really big array of collaborative games typically coming out of the European model of gaming, and it is really shifting the way people are thinking about playing. So there's a real difference in the way game mechanics work, and they can be designed to force people to play together in various different kinds of ways, but also to be elaborate, strategic, to reward all of the same kinds of things that are rewarded by the competitive games that we did, and to create a real excitement. And what I would say was the first time I sat down and played one of these games, it was an interesting experience. I played Pandemic, was one of the first ones I played. And it's a relatively complex one. And it was interesting because I was playing with family members who all grew up in that really hyper-competitive world. And I'm going to admit that my family may have been more extreme than the average in terms of the competitive. I still recall my father and grandfather picking on me when I was 4 because I wasn't really doing the best strategies at bridge. Like, it was awful. You know, I was one of the younger cousins, so I'd be made fun of all the time because at 4, 5, 6, I couldn't keep up with the 20-year-olds. That was the norm. It was you were supposed to just take it and move on and learn how to compete. And within that kind of culture, it never even occurred to me that you could play something where everybody was actually working together and the kids might actually succeed as well and have a good feeling about the game. So when I played with my family with Pandemic, not too surprisingly, we got a good half hour into the game before we had the first family member who said, "Oh, like you're serious, we actually have to work together." They had been waiting for the trick for half an hour. Like they did, it's so ingrained that there was just no belief that you could actually be playing a truly collaborative game and you'd be rewarded for teamwork. And it was kind of an interesting moment. I was finding that the struggle I was experiencing was it wasn't really collaborative in that it was so complex that somebody was kind of teaching it all the time. And so what you had instead was what I tend to refer to as the alpha player. You've got somebody who's directing everybody else because they have all the information in the game. So they're telling everybody else. So again, it's more like there's a leader taking everybody through and telling them what to do. And that's just the nature of those particular games. So I was kind of looking for, okay, what else is there out there? Are there things that can solve those kinds of problems and that can actually be fun, exciting, easy to learn so that you don't actually have to have somebody else guiding you through it and all the rest of that. I'm going to just flash a slide. It's a reminder for me to mention the fact that there's a lot of really good online games that are accomplishing these kinds of things. I'm not talking about online games today, I'm focusing on tabletop, and the main reason I'm focusing on tabletop is because I'm also focusing on what can you actually take into a room and not have to worry about what people's tech skills are or their comfort level. So I'm trying to make it the broader focus because I'm coming from a place as a mediator, conflict resolution person. What can I actually take with me and get people engaged with? So that's the reason. But I do want to actually acknowledge that there are tons and tons and tons of really good games out there that are not. So, okay, so the question I had was, well, can you use them? And I had the question, I've asked the question many times, but I've also been working and collaborating, so I want to keep using me from now on about the people that I talk to, because a lot of these ideas are coming from other people, and I'll try to acknowledge people as I go through for some of the discussions that I've had. But some of the questions were, okay, well, where would you even use them? If you had a collaborative game that was relatively easy, how would you actually use that in dispute resolution? How would you use that in prevention? And here's one that I thought was actually really interesting. Joan Braun is a mediator with the ABC as well. And she does a lot of work, particularly in elder mediation, and she's done some child protection work. So most of it is family oriented, but multi-generational families. And so in chatting with Joan, I was saying, okay, well, what would happen? Like, how would you use it? If you had a nice, simple, easy game to play, how would you see it used actually in a family? And this article kind of triggered this question with Joan about how would you actually use it? And she started talking about, okay, well, you could actually really use it in something that was multi-generational conflict. And the example she used in this particular short article was about a situation of divorce where parents are caught, taking the children off in different directions. And the consequence is children are not seeing grandparents on one side, right? So you end up with this split where the children are really not getting that opportunity to engage with their grandparents. And as she describes it, and she's pulling from a number of different circumstances that she's had, one of the challenges that gets experienced is those children come and they're now visiting grandma. They're visiting grandma after, a year and a half in a court process, and they haven't seen grandma, and they haven't heard positive things about her, or whatever. There's been some kind of separation. And there's a real struggle to be doing things, sitting down and having this visit, how awkward it is. And so Joan has been looking at what are the possibilities for, well, if you come in and you play a collaborative game and you create that kind of energy around it, it's very different than if you come in and you play a competitive game and somebody's feeling bad and and you end up with that kind of bad sense. Instead, you actually start building a little bit of teamwork within it. So she's been proposing using games in a variety of different family contexts. And I think that it applies more broadly if that's where you've had some kind of problem. But I think you also see it playing out in families where it's about prevention. A close friend of mine is a mediator, and she came to the first game jam we had. And I'll talk about game jams, but the game jam was creating games, and it was a bunch of mediators sitting around speculating on what would be a great game, what could we do with it. And so Wendy Lacusta was there, and she's not a gamer. Her son was a competitive Magic the Gathering player for years, but Wendy was always on the outside looking in at the idea of games. And so it was really interesting. She spent the weekend learning how to develop collaborative games, and it was really her first exposure to them. And she went away from there and she said, you know what, this is something that kids should be playing young because it's a way to be learning about these kinds of things. So she gave the presents as presents for Christmas. She went, wow, did she ever spend a lot at her local game store. But all of her Christmas presents that year to the various family members and to friends, kids, were collaborative games. And she said it was Boxing Day. She was getting the phone calls from parents saying, they're playing, nobody's fighting, there's no board flipping, there's no screaming, there's nothing bad happening, it's amazing. And it was such an interesting thing. And she's going, okay, from there, she's gone on. She's been very involved with us in a lot of different game development since then, because she was so amazed at how just making something fun and non-competitive changed the way the family worked. And I think you can extrapolate from that to the idea that there might be places to have these in families. I think the other place that we've been seeing it, and we've been taking a specific game out into the community for the last month because we're kickstarting our game. So we've been going out. I've been going to Law 12 classes. I have friends who've been going to younger classes, but I've been doing Law 12 classes. And I get invited in because I'm a lawyer, and so I have some credibility stepping in. And then I have that moment of, yes, but I'm here to play a zombie game. And the students are kind of going, really? Can you connect that to law for me? And what I've been doing actually is saying, no, let's play the game. And then you connect it to law. You connect it to conflict for me. Tell me why I think this game is actually useful in terms of conflict prevention. What are the kinds of things you can take away from it? And it's been really interesting because amongst all the Law 12 classes I've been to, I've had exactly one individual who was really resistant to the idea. But this was clearly somebody who was also really resistant to everything about what was happening in the classroom. But otherwise, I've been having so much of this, wow, this is actually really fascinating. And so lawyers can do this kind of stuff that is prevention. And these things matter. And I've been getting actually probably more ideas out of Law 12 classes when they're generating ideas about what would you do with a game like this. it doesn't have to be this specific game, but something that's a fast, easy, playable game, what would you do with it? And they've been coming up with great ideas. One of the ideas they came up with, which also is something that we're kind of doing, has been taking it into teams. That happens to be the UBC women's field hockey team that recently won nationals, and that's on. But my daughter's on the team, so she was carrying our game with her, and they've been playing it on all of their various trips. Every time they went on a trip this year, they took the game with them. And she said, okay, the first time she had to really bug people and say, okay, we're playing the game because I need to know how it plays with the team. But after that, every time they were in the airport, they'd say, where's your game? Pull it out, pull it out, pull it out. And she said it was interesting because within the team, they have a good team structure. It isn't a team that has a lot of conflict. But even within that team, they were talking about how you identify different styles, and they would make comparisons with, oh, you always play this card this way. You make this aggressive play. It's just like what you do on the field. And it was a fascinating observation that they were able to talk about team play on the field and extrapolate styles from the way they were game playing. And it just gave them a different way to talk about it. I've certainly imagined, and I'd love to do this, I haven't done it yet, but I would love to take it into a team where there are issues, where there's some bullying going on, for instance, or there's problems with bringing new players in. You get a lot of high school teams where you have the grade 12s and then you've got this one grade 9 who comes onto the team and feels like an outsider. Starting a team with some team building with this kind of thing as one of their nights out, as opposed to go to a movie night or go do something else, has a lot of potential. So anyway, we're kind of speculating about the ways to do it, right? You probably all have ideas. I'm going to welcome some. I'm kind of, I think I'm going to skip over this a little bit and get us to a place where we can play the game. But the one other thing I put out here was taking games into mediation. I have been taking games into mediation in various ways over the years. And mostly what I have been doing is, I really like Dixit. Has anybody played Dixit as a game? Kind of doesn't matter because I really like the cards more than I like the game. The game itself is quite fun. It's all about creating images. There's these gorgeous, gorgeous images, and you're trying to communicate words, sounds, whatever's going to make you identify a card, which is fine. In terms of the cards, though, I just take the cards into mediation because what I have found is having an image that isn't really clear is a great focus tool when people are having impasse. They can't reach a resolution, they're getting angry, they're getting frustrated. Actually putting a card down and saying, okay, this is your focus card. Now, step away from your problem. We need to use this card to generate an idea about the process we're going to use for solving the problem. Everybody looks at you like you're crazy. But what ends up happening is they start thinking, well, merry-go-rounds, where can we go from there? What do merry-go-rounds remind me of? All of a sudden they're talking about things that have nothing whatsoever to do with the actual topic of the dispute. And as soon as you get people to remove and get into a different idea, as soon as you do that, they start getting more creative. Because now they're not stuck on something. And so you start focusing on the process instead. And I have found it's astonishing. I've never found a group that can't create a way to solve a problem by focusing on something that isn't the problem. And so this happens to work really well for me. The other one that I've got up here is Hanabi. And I'll ask the question again. I know it's not one of the more common ones, but has anybody played Hanabi? It's a pretty fast little card game. It's also really inexpensive. So if you were going to just get one card game to try it, I would suggest try Hanabi because it's super easy. But it's kind of an interesting one that gives you a lot to talk about with communication. And if you're having really bad communication, actually stopping and saying, all right, let's play a little game of Hanabi, and then let's talk about where our problems are with communicating around the game. Because you hold your cards, in Hanabi, you hold your cards facing out. So only the other people can see it. If you've played any of those Who Am I games, it's a similar kind of concept. But this one is, you'll have a hand of cards playing out. And people can't see their own cards, but they have to play out of their own hand in a particular pattern. And they can only ask so many questions, and there's all kinds of restrictions on what information you can give and how you can give it. And what it ends up being is this great demonstration of the challenges of restricted information and the way that you share information. And so it gives this great opportunity to take everybody away from what's our problem communicating, and instead start talking about what would be better, how would we be better at Hanabi if we could change our team structure. And it's interesting, I was having a chat earlier, and this is an entirely new idea that I'm going to give credit over here, and you can talk about it if you'd like to yourself, but entirely interesting concept about team building with Scrabble and different word games, but specifically playing a team against a single player who is an expert, with the team probably losing, but having a chance to debrief about the team work and what are the challenges and what are the structures. And I don't know, did you want to just talk a little bit about how that came up for you? Because it was a really cool idea.
Specifically how team.
Well, you don't have to talk about the bachelor party, but you know.
It's not actually not much more than that. I don't know how to say this. It just seemed like a model that could work as a portion of mediation work. Just doing this and highlighting what happens in the team, and it's really kind of just wide open. I don't know exactly what happened, but we were talking just that process of taking the model that I have in mind is to do that and then to debrief, which I think where there's real value, especially if you go in with new fresh. You don't know who this person is playing, but they're doing well, and then debriefing what can the team do better. You create the rules for a game, different parameters, different advantages and disadvantages to work that. The idea is playing it again at some point again and see if your strategy worked.
Yeah, so just a chance to really focus on process and team process and see if you can actually build better team process through being really explicit about what works, what doesn't work. And I think that's one of the things that can work the best in all of these different kinds of games. So I thought that was a really interesting idea that wasn't one I had thought of. So we spent a lot of time in these game jams, and I'll throw out there, if anybody's interested in game jams, then take one of my cards and send me a note, because we will be inviting anybody who's available on a certain day. I'm going to send out just a survey to see who's available for game jams in the spring, and pick a date that's got the most people available, and you're more than welcome to come. But what happens is we meet the Friday night and get together and talk about collaborative games and play collaborative games, and talk about what are the things we wish we could accomplish with them. And then Saturday is spent 10 to 6 actually creating a game. Sunday is usually refining in the morning and then showing it to the other groups in the afternoon. And we've done this a few times now, and each time we've tended to come up with these like really elaborate games, because, for instance, this game was all about how do we restrict information so that people can't boss each other around in a game. That was the starting point. We want to get rid of the alpha player. So everything about that game came out of that concept. This one is a much more complex game. It was a group that really wanted to talk about negotiation and alliance building. And so they wanted to create something that made the most realistic opportunities to actually build alliances and negotiate in a collaborative way. And it was really quite interesting, just the differences as to what happens. But at our most recent one, we came up with this game. And this is the one I'm going to give you guys a chance to play quickly today. This one, the motivation for this one was quite different. We were looking at how do you do something that's faster to teach, that you can play repeated times, that you can get different things out of, that forces collaboration, and we also wanted to remove the alpha player, so we have a restricted information mechanic in the game again.